Hi, I'm Jeremy, and you're listening to Verse by Verse. Interpreting biblical prophecies makes me jumpy, and I'll tell you why. Part of the reason is in Matthew chapter 2. For context, at this point in the gospel account, Jesus is still very young, probably not even 2 years old. King Herod, who ruled over Judea, heard that the King of the Jews had been born, and he hatched a plan to have Jesus murdered before Jesus could become a threat to his authority. So God sends a dream to Joseph, warning him about Herod's plan and instructing him to flee with his family to Egypt. And so in Matthew chapter 2, verses 14 through 15, we read this. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. What I want to talk about today is that last little snippet at the end, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. That's just a really brief, passing comment from Matthew, but it tells us a lot. For starters, it tells us that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fleeing to Egypt wasn't just a last-minute adjustment God had to make to his plan. It was the plan. Matthew doesn't mention what prophet spoke those words, but it's a quote from the book of Hosea, who lived more than 7 centuries before Jesus was born, which means this moment in time had been part of God's plan for at least 700 years, probably more. That's wild to me. It's a reminder that God doesn't operate the way we do. You and I, we're trying to plan for the big things that the next year or decade might bring. But God, He's got little details planned out 7 centuries in advance. But that's not even the really wild part. Have you ever looked at the actual prophecy Matthew is talking about? It's in Hosea 11, verse 1, and it says, When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Maybe it's just me, but I read that verse, that whole chapter, and nothing about it even remotely looks like a messianic prophecy. It's talking about ancient Israel and the Exodus and how they turned away from God and how that relationship will one day be restored. What we discover in the book of Matthew is that this one line, this one brief passing line of Hosea's inspired prophecy, was actually a promise that stretched over 700 years into the future and had to do with the specific event that God was going to bring about. All this happened that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. That's how God operates, on a time frame and with a perspective we can't begin to fathom. And He can tell us exactly what He's going to do through a single line of text, and we might not even recognize it until long after it happens. And that's why interpreting prophecy makes me jumpy. The details that God lays out about the future, I can try to make sense of them, but I don't have God's perspective. I can't perfectly tease out every detail He's included in His inspired word. I'm not smart enough, and I'm bound to make mistakes. But that also gives me comfort. I'm not smart enough, but God is. He knows what He's doing, and I trust Him. He has the foresight to say, in 700 plus years, I'm going to tell someone who hasn't even been born yet that they need to take my son into Egypt for a little while. I can't plan that. I can't even perceive that it would be necessary. I can't even perceive that it's something God promised would happen, except for the fact that it's already happened, and Matthew very clearly says, this happened because God said it would happen. But that's the God I serve. That's the God who holds my life in His hands. He sees futures I can't imagine, and He plans perfectly for them. And He asks me to trust Him on the way there. Because one day, He's going to fulfill every word spoken by the mouth of all His prophets. And that is a future I'm excited about.
Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.